Okay, so far in this guide, we've had a lot of discussion about some of the things that don't work and the flaws of manipulation and pedaling circles. Let's talk about the best technique in pedaling. Now, I want to be clear, this is my professional opinion of 20 years of doing this. I spent a lot of times with biomechanical specialists. I've been deep down this field of research, but still, there are smarter people in the world than me. Everybody should watch this and come up with their own determination. So just a quick reminder of how we're going to refer to things on the clock face. I did a short video about this above. Make sure you watch it if you don't understand. But we're basically using clock face discussion of where the crank arm and the foot are in that pedal stroke for discussion. So let's talk about the four phases of your pedal stroke. And I break this down into four phases, and I made this diagram, so no making fun of it, into four phases. Phase number one is the momentum phase. It's the setup, it's its name, and its role, its job is building momentum. Phase number two, the power phase, its job is to be propulsion, is its job. It needs to be propulsive. Phase number three is the transition. This is one of the hardest phases to understand. There's all kinds of myths out there on this. The key role there is synchronization. Cover that more in a moment. And phase four is the recovery phase. This is simply unloading and clearing. It's the least complex of the phases, but yet we tend to try to manipulate it aggressively. So let's shrink this down a little bit. And I'm about to make an extremely busy slide. So best I can do. So here we go. Let's start this discussion in power phase, in this concept of phase two, the power phase, because it literally is the most important phase in learning to master this, is in the production of power. So during this important phase, it is simply understood that this is our strongest phase and where we produce the highest peak force of the power stroke. And it's where we have the most to gain in both power output and gross efficiency. This phase requires us to be strong at pushing down, stomping on the pedal, and controlled. It also requires a certain amount of ankle stability. That doesn't mean a small amount of movement is unacceptable. You can have a small amount of movement. I was having a good conversation with Brian Hammond about this, and he called it a quiet movement. You don't want a whole lot of flappy ankle, because that flap, you're bleeding off power pushing into the pedals. And you need this concept of applying, the end goal really is apply a strong controlled pressure in the right direction, downward force, as I mentioned above that goal point, to be successful. So what does that mean? This is the concept of vectoring, and it's easiest to explain in this power phase number two. We need to work on the development. If we want a really high peaky force wave, good strength here, we need to be able to push down strongly on the pedal. The peakiest point of our pedal stroke usually comes between 3 and 4 o'clock. It can vary by person and what they're doing, and a track cyclist with a long crank and a road cyclist with a shorter, but it's usually in that 3 to 4 o'clock range. The force that's pushing straight down is the force that's propulsive. It's what's moving the bike forward. So we need to focus on stomping straight down in this phase, because any power that isn't directed straight down, it's actually straight down by then and a little bit back, but we'll work with straight down, is a waste. A lot of cyclists still are pushing forward in the stroke at this given time. Any force, so you can measure force, how hard you're pushing into the pedal. And if 20% of that force is going forward and 80% is going down, you are losing 20% of that force. It's in the wrong direction. So what we're trying to do, and we've been doing this drill all throughout the early parts of base camp, we've been focusing on stomping down, what we're training your brain and your body to do very quietly. And we didn't talk about the end goal so much because you overthink it. You manipulate the stroke too much. Think about what you saw above in the ultimate guide. We're teaching you to stabilize the ankle by connecting the foot to the sole of your shoe, and then stomping down to direct the force in the right direction, because I'm trying to stop that habit a lot of cyclists have where they're still pushing forward through the downstroke. So that's phase two, our power phase and our propulsive phase. Coming around phase two, as we get into around 5 o'clock in the clock phase, we come into this synchronized phase. Now, there's a lot of misconception about this phase. So many of us know this concept or have heard this concept or have worked on this concept. Let's scrape mud off the bottom of our shoes and pull that foot back through. Yeah, don't do that. The thing you always need to consider is whatever this foot is doing, this pedal, attached to your foot is doing, the other leg, the other foot is doing something else that may, at that moment in time, be actually much more important. And that's why this phase three transition is so important, because it's the transition phase. So why they need to synchronize is we simply want to get this foot to not be an impingement to this phase one, which I'll talk about when I come around. So we don't want to apply or manipulate the pedal stroke because we muck up the system of both legs working together. Again, this is exactly why one-legged pedaling drills do not work. So instead of pushing down and dropping your heel and scraping mud and pulling through the back, you really simply want to disengage force and gently just move the foot back. And this disengagement idea is you almost want to stop thinking, it's hard to explain, about that pull through the bottom, because you want to be much more thoughtful of what's going on in the other leg in phase one coming over the top. So we're disengaging. So we just wanted, the goal is we want to avoid excessive effort. If we're engaging muscle and putting effort in there, we're just wasting energy, because the other foot coming over the top is so much more powerful. It's going to dominate the stroke anyway. Don't waste the energy. So we want a simple decrease in disengagement of force. We do want to maintain a reasonable, stable ankle. Again, that doesn't mean moving. You'll begin to see a drift up. So we're stabilizing the foot as we disengage the force and prepare it for the recovery phase. In the recovery phase, this needs to be the way I wrote it here. I'll read the bullet. The leg moves upward mostly passively. Like, you want to play this game on the upstroke. How much can you just unload and clear for like the least amount of muscular engagement? Like, pretend like you're trying to feel what's the least amount of work I could do there. Because we don't want effort. Again, it's this impact of while one leg is doing one thing, the other leg is doing something else. This leg's in its most powerful phase while you're unloading here. So we don't want that leg to interfere with the strong process. Remember, I showed you the one leg of force wave. What happens when we do that? We reduce when we're over pulling up, when we're over manipulating the back leg, we reduce the peakiness, the power output of the downstroke where all the power comes from. Now this should be the upstroke, a minor hip flexor and hamstrings, just kind of assist clearing and unloading that foot. We want to teach this to be very natural. We just want to remove resistance. So phase three is we synchronize for that removal of resistance. I'm sorry. Oh, look, there's a typo. That should say phase four. In phase three, we remove that. We set up by synchronizing that removement of resistance by decreasing and disengaging. And here we just lightly unload. As we come around to phase one, here's where we're turning that leg back on. And I'm going to give you an important trick here. Again, on this concept of vectoring. The goal of this phase is momentum. So what do I want momentum for? I want to build momentum into this power phase. The more I can resist any impingement up here, one of the reasons shorter cranks may or may not be better, but really talking from a bioenergy way, like making power. we want to improve momentum and get into that power phase sooner and better, more well set up, I guess, for lack of a term. So how we do that is we need to drop the heel somewhere here around 11 o'clock. Now, when I say drop the heel and I coach that in groups, you feel like it might almost be negative, but if you were videoing yourself, it's not. It usually just kind of becomes flat to a slight angle up. It feels negative because you're at the top of the pedal stroke, you're pushing over the top of the pedal stroke, and everything, your hinges, your knee and your joint, really a hinge and a lever, are condensing. So it feels more negative than it is, but videotape yourself. It's not negative. You're just dropping the heel and setting up that good stabilized foot for the power phase. And we direct force to 4 o'clock. I'm going to demo this in 1 second, what I mean by that. And the goal is really ensuring a smooth transition for continuous, efficient pedaling. We're setting up that power stroke by building momentum into it. Imagine like, we're accelerating into that phase. But the trick is when most people focus on phase one, I did this in a previous workout in one of our group rides, and I asked people to just focus on this pushing phase up here, this phase one, and people reported feeling big imbalances. And that's true. It's often we can't coordinate the direction of force. Our natural desire coming across the top, and we've heard this coached and trained, is to push the foot forward. So on a line going straight forward. But if you're remembering what I demoed down here in the vectoring kind of little example, that might not be right. What you want to do in our drills, until it becomes a skill and it becomes natural, is you want to think about directing your force downward and forward to about 4 o'clock. Like you're literally directing the force into that peak power point. So 3, 4 o'clock on a clock. What that does is it accelerates the foot over the arch. Because remember, you're attached to that pedal. It is going in a circle. You're directing the force. You're setting up for an earlier engagement of downward force. And you're pushing the force over the curve, like boom, boom, boom. That's why we teach you to stomp first. Then we're starting to teach the setup phase, that heel drop and direct force to 4 o'clock. Now, the struggle is we need to learn this. Remember, drill to skill till it's automatic. Drill to skill till it's automatic. We spent a lot of time early in base camp focusing on the stomp, the ability to make that strong downward propulsive phase. If you watch the video before this one on the science study, you can see why. It is well known that that's the secret to pros. They push down harder. They don't make smooth little circles. They don't have perfect balance. They just simply push down harder because that's the secret to making more power. The rest of these phases are enabling our best phase 2 pedaling. Hope that helps. Thanks, everybody.